Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this techUK webinar on GreenOps, dark data, and a sustainable approach to cloud computing. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Hazel, and I'm techUK's Programme Manager for Cloud Computing. A couple of quick housekeeping points before we get going. This meeting is being recorded, and we're going to distribute it as a webinar for those who couldn't attend live. So please keep an eye out for the link and share it with colleagues. We are all going to be taking Q&A from the audience, so please put any questions or comments that you've got in the chat and I will put them to the panel as we go through, or the panel can pick them up themselves. But please try and keep your cameras off and your microphones muted to avoid disruption. This session is part of our annual Cloud Computing Campaign Week that gives the techUK community an opportunity to exchange ideas and thought leadership around key issues in cloud computing. And there's going to be lots of great content going out throughout the week. So please click the link I'm about to put in the chat or down below if you're watching this as a webinar on the website, and check out some of the other blogs that have been submitted this week by members. This session also follows techUK's Insights paper that we published at the end of 2023 that included in its recommendations that organisations should integrate GreenOps best practices into their operations, take steps to tackle the dark data challenge by minimising the storage of unused data in the cloud, and harness green software principles and cloud native technologies to operate as efficiently and leanly as possible. So those are some of the themes that we're going to be unpacking today, and we've got a great panel lined up. They can introduce themselves far better than I can. So if I can ask the panel to introduce themselves, their organisation, and say briefly a little bit about their interest in this topic, perhaps starting with John.
Hi there, I'm John from Greenpixie. I'm CEO co-founder, and what we're really setting out to do is bring sustainability to cloud computing. And we primarily do this by providing very granular cloud emissions data, which can then be used by software engineers and FinOps professionals to quantify optimizing the cloud for sustainability.
Thanks, John. Klairi?
Hello, everybody. Klairi Liis. I am a director in the consulting business of PwC, PwC being a large professional services firm that, amongst other things, supports organisations with journey to the cloud and sustainability. That's me.
Paul?
Yeah, my name's Paul Bevis, CTO at FSP. So we're a digital transformation consultancy helping organisations essentially adopt and use digital technology effectively. I've been working with custom software for about the past 20 years and ultimately passionate about efficiency, which has a lot of ties in with sustainability and just basically helping people build within the cloud.
Grant?
Yeah, so hi everybody, I'm Grant Caley, Solutions Director for NetApp in the UK and Ireland. And NetApp, if you don't know us, in this particular context today, we're looking at obviously how we can help you with sustainability challenges with what we call an intelligent data infrastructure. And very basically, that is unified data storage across on-premise and AWS, Azure and Google to help you store your data and optimize it. But then a layer of integrated data services around about cyber resilience, governance, sustainability views and dashboards, etc. And then finally, we also do cloud operations solutions to help you take FinOps into the space of reducing the cost of running in the clouds and being able to help you achieve optimized, kind of sustainability goals in that way as well. So that's NetApp.
Great, thanks everyone. Well, we've got lots to get through, so let's crack on. I want to start out with a bit of a general scene setting question, and kind of ask where you see the key opportunities and challenges of cloud-enabled digital transformation, perhaps a bit more broadly for organizations looking to operate more sustainably, lower the carbon footprint of their IT estates, etc. Grant, should I come back to you first?
Yep. So I mean, I think what we try to help customers do, I guess, in that respect, is take better advantage of the cloud. For me, anyway, is about taking advantage of greener data centers. The technologies in the clouds are modern. The tooling is better in a lot of cases, not all, obviously. But there's technologies there that customers can take advantage of. There's shared platforms that they can leverage to optimize their use of technology and particularly emissions producing technology. And I think when you look at the cloud as a destination for helping you with that, there are real advantages if you take proper kind of steps to make sure that you're doing the right things in the cloud, you're taking advantage of all the tools and technologies. So I think, yes, the cloud in itself can offer a lot of advantages for customers outside of the traditional on-premise data centers that they're using.
Yeah, John, do you want to come in here? I saw you nodding a bit. Perhaps do you want to build on the if you question mark that Grant set up there?
Yeah, I definitely can do that. So in general, I would say moving from on-premise to the cloud is a sustainable move, but I would only say some of the time, certainly. And it all comes down to what resolution of data you're looking at. One example where that wouldn't be the case, so if you had a reasonably optimized on-prem setup in a low carbon intensity region, such as Scotland, and you were moving over to, let's say, Microsoft Azure or AWS to a high intensity carbon country, say Poland, you would certainly be adding a lot of carbon to your IT estate. And it's important to kind of really look at the high resolution of what cloud actually is when it comes to this. And location-based is one example. Another example where that may not be the case is when it comes to how much waste you're operating in the cloud. That can become a problem due to the opaque nature that may arise when software engineers are spinning up instances and not realizing the carbon impact or the cost impact of what they're doing. So yeah, I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate and say the cloud isn't always sustainable. However, it often is due to the hyperscaler data centers being so efficient.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. As always, it depends what you're talking about, and I'm sure we'll come on in a bit to talk about what data is available to cloud users of cloud and how they can use it more effectively. Klairi, can I bring you in on this point around kind of some of the opportunities of cloud, and perhaps if you could expand a bit on how you think organizations, clients that you work with, how well organizations more broadly are doing in adopting to the kind of consumption-based model of IT and actually using it in a kind of flexible, dynamic, scalable way, and to harness the kind of efficiencies of cloud.
Yeah, I mean that kind of question. How much time have you got? So look, firstly, to kind of I like, John, your devil's advocacy, and I think it is absolutely important to look at the detail. But if you look at some of the, and of course, hyperscalers are interested in selling their data centers at the consumption. But if you look at the average numbers that they're suggesting you can save with regards to efficiency as well as carbon, I mean, I think Microsoft says something in the lines of, if you move from on-prem to their data center, I think it's a potentially up to 90%, more efficient for energy and carbon maybe even a bit more. I think AWS is a slightly lower, but similar ballpark. So I think the cloud providers and hyperscalers themselves are wowing organizations with the numbers, and I haven't seen an IT strategy or a move to the cloud strategy that doesn't include a section in it which talks about the sustainability gains. So I think that in and of itself it's interesting to get that second side that gets into the real granularity of the data to say may not always be the case, but the numbers are quite wow looking. Going back to Chris's question around key opportunities, I mean, what we see a lot of, and it's actually quite interesting, we recently published, PwC published our EMEA cloud survey, where we polled over 2,000 business and IT leaders across Europe. And the key thing that came out of that is, when we started the journey to the cloud conversations a number of years back, a lot of organizations were defaulting to lift and shift, which is less efficient and also definitely less sustainable. There's a real reckoning that the cloud is not just there to help modernize and improve the IT performance, but also actually a further means to innovate and create entirely new opportunities and value chains, which of course, as you're building on this, newly opened cloud, you have AI, you can do all kinds of cool stuff. it then further contributes into the expansion of your IT footprint, right? So it's always a case of there is opportunity, there is innovation, there is a sustainability angle, but actually you also need to think about it with regards to your strategy for growth, how you're enabling it, what checks and balance you've got in place, and how are you effectively controlling it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Before we move on specifically to look at GreenOps, Paul, do you want to come in and build on this question around kind of key opportunities and potential challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I echo what everyone else has been saying, but I think that with the lift and shift aspect of people moving to the cloud, any transformation program, pretty much of any kind, is fundamentally a people challenge. So if you're lifting everything and sticking in the cloud and then continuing to operate it in the same way as you did with traditional on-prem infrastructure, it's not necessarily going to be that much more efficient. Okay, fair enough. If the carbon intensity between your existing data center and the new one is better, yes, you will save naturally by that. But really, it's about just trying to change the way people behave in terms of utilizing the cloud. That applies to software engineers and users in general. So I think the biggest challenge we see is just people actually changing their behaviors. How long do I keep the data for? Do I need to keep it forever? And then from a developer's perspective, getting them to think about more automation, getting them to think about perhaps serverless and platform as a service technologies that mean that it's not always on and you're only using what you need to. Which ultimately is going to be cheaper, but that is definitely a shift in mindset for people.
If I can build on that, Chris, very briefly, I think what Paul's just said also brings us to one of the other underpinning challenges for everybody, I think, which is the people challenge is also a skills challenge. Because in today's world, it's not just about being a good enterprise architect or a good platform architect or an Azure developer or an AI expert. You kind of need to be an all-in-one. And those individuals are very, very hard to find. And it's very hard to find the money to pay them competitively so that they would come to your organization and not go next door. So big challenge in transformation is the skills as well, in-house as well as contracts.
Absolutely.
Okay. So great point. One of the key points that came out of our session on Monday, pretty much everyone on the panel, there was consensus that organizations would do well to think about this in terms of people transformation and cultural transformation and organizational transformation first, rather than tech transformation. It's not necessarily about buying some things. It's about what you're doing with them. I want to move on and talk a bit about GreenOps and about what organizations can do. We've set the scene there well in terms of it's not necessarily a guaranteed panacea that if you move to the cloud everything will automatically be more sustainable, and there's a big role for organizations to think about how they're consuming the cloud and what they're doing in the cloud. So I'm just wondering, and perhaps John, I'll come back to you first on this one. What role do you see FinOps and GreenOps and optimization and automation in achieving that kind of missing piece of sustainability? And how would you kind of define GreenOps? What advice would you give to businesses looking to integrate it?
Yeah, certainly. So we've been around for a few years as a cloud sustainability company. We've received funding and we've had to commercialize, which is they call it the canyon or something that startups get past to go ahead and flourish and to survive as a sustainability startup. In 2024, you need to basically facilitate hard business outcomes. Being sustainable for sustainability's sake isn't enough to survive in this market, and that's just a reality. Luckily for us, we found the FinOps industry, which is responsible for reducing billions of dollars worth of wasted cloud spend. And that is ultimately where organizations can start acting in cloud sustainability. And they're already doing this. You're already optimizing the cloud and reducing CO2 in order to save costs. And all you need is the data to be able to take credit for that ultimately. And this is what I would call cloud GreenOps, which is effectively reducing emissions in the cloud. first and foremost, but it also correlates and intersects with cost savings in a lot of cases as well. So that's probably the GreenOps, which is most appropriate for this conversation today. But wider GreenOps, new term, but I would define that as reducing emissions across the IT estate, including cloud, but also including on-premise, colo, and yeah, your entire IT ultimately.
Yeah, I think it's important for us all to remember that obviously everyone's cloud setup is going to be different. And while some people that might be exclusively everything in public cloud, a lot of organizations are going to be dealing with some legacy footprint and a hybrid cloud setup by default.
Yep. And I'll quickly just sorry to interrupt, Chris. The one other point I just wanted to make is how sustainability is in a rare position to be the town square in which IT teams can really achieve their goals, primarily cost optimization. With FinOps, the biggest cultural challenge was getting finance people, leadership, and the software engineers implementing these remediations to actually go ahead and clean up this waste. And sustainability is a really great way to motivate and start an initiative within the enterprise to basically catalyze what you're trying to do anyway. So that was just the final point on yeah, it's GreenOps is actually a culture benefit for your existing initiatives as well as an initiative within itself.
I think that's I love that phrase, town square. That's I think that's great. Paul, can I bring you in here on this question around kind of GreenOps, what advice you give to business leaders, and particularly just expanding on that town square point, how you in conversations you would have with clients, how you would get business leaders to see cloud sustainability and all of the good stuff that John was just talking about as an opportunity and not just a cost center.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I can see that we've got some questions in the chat as well, so maybe I'll try and cover some of those as well. I mean, ultimately, what I say is a sustainable organization is an efficient organization. So you're looking at running efficiently, which is going to ultimately mean lower costs as well as lower emissions. But kind of building on what John said, I think certainly all the people that I've spoken to, running workshops, trying to raise awareness of this, it's so much more motivational than pure, let's just go and save some money. So when you're looking at trying to change people's behaviors and encourage people to think more sustainably, as well as using the cloud more sustainably and just technology in generally more sustainably, that actually has a benefit, and there will be a knock-on effect for the organization in terms of its bottom line, because people can actually start to think about their own behaviors. But going beyond that, you then need to start establishing a bit of a baseline. So I think one of the questions is where do you go from there in terms of after you've established a spend baseline? Well, I think that's always been a bit of a challenge, with different cloud providers providing different levels of granularity of data. Actually, I think that's where John's organization, Greenpixie, really does help in terms of actually making that much more transparent in terms of what's the impact that some of your actions are having by how much you're consuming, and where is the place where you can kind of invest the money to try to do something about that. I wouldn't say that necessarily one of the other questions is would we be looking at the PUE for some of the data centers. Far and away the biggest impact is where you run the work, not necessarily the efficiency of the data center itself, although clearly that has an effect, but it's more about the intensity of the carbon in the region you happen to be in. So if you have the luxury of being able to choose where your workloads run, that's where you'll have the biggest benefit. So yeah, I appreciate there are data sovereignty regulations and considerations to have. There's latency considerations to have. But hey, if you can run your workload in a Nordic country, say Sweden, they have a far lower carbon intensity of their national grid than most other countries. That's going to massively reduce your emissions. If you can't do that, then yeah, find the most efficient data center in the region where you where you have the lowest intensity that you have. And beyond that, when a bit of a baseline established, that's what you can measure from.
I've been itching to come in on a devil's advocate point,
Go
if
for
I
it.
may.
Go for
it. I love the town hall sort of visual it brings up, and I love the sustainable organizations are efficient. I would turn it on its head though, and not from I think purpose is really important, and everybody talks a lot about sustainability, but the cold hard fact is that when you look at what organizations get rewarded in their share price, it's not the organizations that make sustainability driven decisions. It's actually a lot of organizations. I mean, ExxonMobil versus BP would be a good example. Yeah. BP some years ago made great announcements around reinvent and everything else, and how they were looking to move into sustainable energies. ExxonMobil went the other way. Look at the share price. So I think that the cold reality of the market still, despite best efforts, can be that companies are unfortunately rewarded for doing the thing that makes them money. Now, I would turn that great statement around purpose and efficiency and sustainability the reverse and say an efficient organization is also a sustainable organization. And in my experience, when economic times are tough and when there isn't enough money to invest, companies are much more open to conversations around, here's energy that is walking out the door that you're paying for, which actually you're not using efficiently. You reduce that, you reduce your carbon footprint. Here's all the waste in your IT, which you could cut out, and you could cut out cost, would also make it more sustainable. I find that sustainability conversation progresses much faster. Not to be a cynic, but.
Yeah, I think also organizations need to look at, particularly for the cloud, look at delivering GreenOps up front and not trying to layer it on as to the mess they've already built, because we see a lot of companies who've been in the cloud now for 3, 4, 5 years, and they're way unoptimized in both the costs that they're paying and consequently obviously the CO2 emissions that the infrastructure that's underneath that supports that has as well. They haven't automated across that, so they're over provisioning, underutilizing, and exacerbating the problem. So we've spent a lot of time looking at customers from what are they doing from a compute perspective, a data perspective, how can we help them look at what they've got and either address what they've already got into as a mess and try and more optimize that, or build it in up front so that they're building and deploying in an optimized fashion from day one. And I think that's really important for organizations to try and do.
I think so. I think it's from day one, going in with your eyes open is everything. From day one, if you believe cloud equals sustainable tech, you're going to end up with a non-sustainable cloud. Yeah. If you believe I have a massive discount on my cloud spend, money, I have all the money in the world, you're going to waste a lot of money. And it's just seeing things with a fine resolution to be able to, as you said, act from day one and prevent it being a problem by going in with an adult head on with the realities of being in the cloud and all the massive benefits it comes with.
John, I had a question around, and just to flag some questions in the chat around effectively tracking and managing consumption for IT workloads specifically. I had a question around how you would kind of rate, looking broadly across the industry, different cloud providers, the data that's actually available to businesses. I mean, let's say that you get all of the internal buy-in that you need and everybody's on board and we want to operate as efficiently and leanly, as optimized as possible. We want to leverage those, consumption-based dynamic provisioning, etc. Do companies actually have access to enough kind of granular, timely, specific data to do that optimization, or is there more that we can do as an industry to kind of enable those who are using cloud?
So the cloud providers, they vary from they're completely unusable to actually starting to be useful and accurate data. And what the industry actually needs is not just accurate data in a carbon dashboard that's provided by the cloud providers, but granular data that exists within the workflows of FinOps professionals and of software engineers, where they can act on the data and have the granularity to do that. So it's accuracy, granularity, and practicality. That is actually when action happens within companies. And the cloud providers, I would say, do not. I think they tick accuracy to varying degrees, but they fall apart with accessibility and practicality ultimately, because you need to see if I right size this instance, what is the CO2 impact of that, and putting it within the softwares we're using to do these optimizations, because that way software engineers can begin to really see the impact they're making. And yeah, we need to get past top level dashboards to this level of data. And yeah, there's a movement, Greenpixie being one of them, of these kind of new wave of startups that are basically bridging this gap in the market between what the cloud providers are showing and what companies can actually create value with in terms of reducing emissions and reducing costs. And just the last point, what I will kind of call out the difference here. So saying if you were to move to a cloud provider from on-prem and have a 90% saving, that unfortunately is a example of top level thinking with not necessarily an adult head on, because the assumptions made there are very top level. They assume the worst possible on premise next to a coal fire power plant with somebody who doesn't know how to plug in a server versus a absolutely doesn't exist version within the cloud. And on top of that, for a lot of the cloud providers, they are packing in as many regos and offsets as they like to messy up the data to the point of it not being practical for an enterprise use. So yeah, that's really where I think cloud emissions data needs to go, and where it is with the cloud providers ultimately. But the industry is all moving towards this. It's just who's going to get there first.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because we spend a lot of time optimizing customer workloads in the cloud, so the resource utilization is less. What we don't see and can't see at the moment is actually what that means from a CO2 footprint state. So there's no comparison whether that's actually more efficient or less than running it on premise. You know, we can do that on premise and understand the footprint there because it's all fairly empirical and accessible. But without, as you say, John, without that ability to see what the cloud providers are actually consuming for the services that they have, you can't compare them. So it makes it very difficult.
Yeah.
Paul, I see you nodding. Do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think it probably where the data doesn't exist on emissions, because and I completely agree with John that certainly where most of the cloud providers where I've seen that they're so power purchase agreements, they're offsetting their emissions so it looks a lot lower than in reality it is. But what they are really good at is providing you very granular data of what you use, because that's how they charge you. So you do have a baseline now that then makes it perhaps difficult to roll that up into what's our top level number in terms of our emissions, because we need to include that in our net zero calculations. Yeah, that is more challenging. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of, and this is certainly some of the advice that I give, is don't try to get accurate numbers, because you could be there for a long time trying to do that and you'll be second guessing yourself a lot. Aim to reduce consumption, because that will also reduce your costs. And you do have very granular data there. I know that the emissions-based data will come and it will get better over time. And I'm sure that there'll be more regulation that kind of compels cloud providers and all organizations, quite frankly, to be more accurate about it. But in the meantime, focus on consumption and what you can do to reduce that.
I'm conscious of time, so I'm sure we'll keep drawing out these points. I want to move on and talk a little bit about data and what people often call the dark data challenge. And perhaps, Klairi, if I come to you first on this one, how, in terms of your impression of the industry broadly, but also your conversation with clients, how big of a challenge do you think dark data is here, and what can we do as I'm thinking both on an organizational level, but also as an individual, to be mindful of this challenge and take steps to as you said, you start from the perspective of an efficient organization is a sustainable organization.
Yeah, I think that the data challenge and also the dark data challenge are enormous, to be honest, because it's very easy to not see it and not worry about it. And if you're not measuring the cost impact or the efficiency impact that has, then you're effectively blind to what's walking out the door. A couple of examples. There are individual based examples, like, for example, OneDrive or email. There are lots of organizations that don't set mailbox limits or OneDrive limits until they get to a point where maybe they need to migrate all of their data. And suddenly they realize that 10% of the organization has a OneDrive that's larger than 100 gig. What's all that data? Why is it there? What is it? Is it purposeful? So there is a level of sort of individual responsibility, but also how an organization manages those parameters with regards to what's a reasonable amount of data to have versus not. There is a kind of a project level or an initiative level. So oftentimes innovation, great thing, can also drive gluttony, I would argue. So, if an organization is setting up a digital twin, for example, they're, setting up hundreds of sensors and they go, we want all the data. Okay, what are you doing with it and how long are you keeping it? Because it's great to say, I want all of the data, every 30 seconds for years, and you put it into cold storage and you forget about it because maybe one day we will come back to it. That's kind of like the, cupboard underneath the stairs, which you never want to open the door of. So there's many examples, I think, where either it's the don't want to lose it, I'm going to save it just in case, or it's just easier not to think about it and not to set up rules as opposed to deal with that challenge. And I think cloud in some ways makes it easier because you're seeing the actual data volume. That number is perhaps in front of you a bit less than if it was on an on-prem setup. But definitely a challenge that needs addressing on multiple levels.
Yeah, we saw there was a survey done by a disk company, Seagate, who looked at all the data that was generated. And what they found from that was that of all the data that companies generate, only 32% is ever used. So 68%, that iceberg kind of effect, is sitting there unused. And that's all powered by disks, by infrastructure, by, so the challenge is you can bring optimized hardware technologies, and we provide some of those for customers, but the real challenge is in helping customers identify what that data is, helping them classify it, helping them identify what they can get rid of, what they don't need to keep, what's not been accessed, etc. And that classification for in terms of the solutions we talk to customers about, I think is the biggest saving they can make, because ultimately the data is driving everything which they then apply to that data, whether it's compute applications, storage of it, on-premise or cloud, doesn't make any difference. And most customers do not spend the time, A, classifying it, and B, making the decision then to delete it. Only in the last year or so have I started to hear from customers about those being prepared to delete data because they realize the impact, the effect that this is actually having on sustainability, as well as the cost of maintaining those environments.
And there's a data governance and process impact there as well, because doing a one-off classification and review and deletion is all well and good, but unless you have a structure and a setup in your organization with individuals responsible, roles and responsibilities, who owns the data, who makes the decision, it's going to be a problem that just reoccurs every so often.
Yeah, AI is helping in that respect. Actually, AI ops and the tooling that's being built into some of these technologies is helping shortcut that decision-making process. But you're right, there still has to be somebody that takes ownership for that, whether it's a chief data officer or whatever you want to call it across an organization. It's a big challenge, I think, that companies have.
Grant, do you have any experience with data deletion policies and what they tend to be? Somebody brought up yesterday, actually, in a digital sustainability event I was at. Do you know what those tend to be, or do you have any experience?
I mean, so some organizations, regulatory ones in particular, they have a defined period they have to retain the data, and they are taking the decisions outside of that once that period expires to actually delete data. So for them, they've got a kind of a governed date they have to keep it for, and after that period they delete it. So regulated industries are actually better at doing that than unregulated ones. Unregulated ones generally have no understanding as to whether they should keep it, whether they shouldn't. Primary data is one side. The actual other challenge people have is that everything which they don't delete, they end up backing up, provisioning for disaster recovery, keeping multiple copies, and that you can address a bit more easily and use technology to help you. But yeah, it's still a bit of a minefield. Companies are having to really come up with their own policies and strategies, whether they can because they're regulated or whether they're having to do so just because it makes sense to do it. But the sooner they start, the easier it gets. The longer they leave it, the worse it becomes, you know.
It's interesting because I think that technologies like Copilot or M365 Copilot and generative AI actually, I think, are surfacing this problem and perhaps making people address it. I totally agree. It's more of a data governance, and I think retention policies have a part to play. But where these technologies like generative AI and Copilot are being used, and people are finding all this old data, it is surfacing it much more to people that it perhaps was a lot harder to see, because it's actually going out and finding it and then bringing you back legacy and outdated information. So if you actually want to be able to make use of some of these newer technologies, actually addressing some of that data challenge, particularly with the unstructured information and knowledge workers, that AI can actually be a force for good there, because if you want to roll that out, you're going to need to sort your data out as well.
There is, of course, the adverse impact of sustainability when we talk about AI and the amount of processing power that that's going to need.
Yes.
And I don't know about you guys, but it feels like every conversation that we have these days is either about AI or generative AI or something in those lines. So I think there's also an element here around thinking about and considering, organizations want to innovate. Cloud enables that. It gives you the power to do that. You should absolutely focus on what are the areas in your business that AI use cases will make a major difference for, and you should go for it. But at the same time, going after everything with AI and the amount of processing power that you would use up potentially unnecessarily, and the sustainability footprint that creates, is also something that probably is not talked about a lot, but will, as the data centers grow, and I think they are growing significantly. I think this will also become front and center.
Yep, this is my favorite topic at the moment. I'm really fun at parties. AI sustainability is a perfect example where the E meets the S, and when that happens, then people really start caring, because ultimately, AI is a combination of two of the biggest existential threats: environment, basically, potentially really causing huge damage, and AI causing social repercussions we don't understand and getting out of control. So when you combine those two things, then it's gonna, I think AI sustainability in the next 10 years might even jump past cloud sustainability, IT, GreenOps, because it will be such a big problem. Mark Zuckerberg there's a clip I saw him saying, there's all these clips going about, and he says the limiting factor for AI growth isn't going to be compute or capital, it's going to be electricity supply. So the actual infrastructure that is of our grid is going to be the limiting factor. So, and that doesn't change. That takes decades to build out, ultimately, and it's highly regulated. So when there's data centers taking up all the real estate outside London, as it already is, and all these other places, and residential projects are restricted due to electricity restrictions and water supply, then it'll become a huge issue. And this is probably the very start of it now, what we're discussing in cloud sustainability. But if AI lives up anywhere near to the hype, then that could actually be a reality.
There were two stats that came out. One is that in Ireland, data centers consume as much energy as the population does. And also there was a survey by the Synergy Group, which came out yesterday, I think, that pointed to the fact that AI will cause the doubling of the number of data centers in the next 4 years. So you compound those two things together and we've got a real problem,
Yeah.
I fear if we get too far down the rabbit hole of the data center sprawl and the efficiency of AI, then that'll be a whole other webinar. So I just want to bring us back a little bit to GreenOps and dark data. You all kind of drew out some interesting threads there around kind of your data management policies and the structures that you need to have in place kind of organizationally to, as Grant was saying, encourage assessing actually what that data is and what can be deleted and what you actually need to keep. I'm wondering if anyone's got any thoughts on how you can, either for that GreenOps piece or the dark data piece, how you can encourage people within the organization or empower people within teams to operationalize that on an individual level. Because obviously, as Klairi said at the top of this segment, often people just save stuff to your OneDrive, leave it there forever, leave attachments in emails, never delete them. It wasn't until I started working at techUK and looking at these issues that I thought about how much stuff is just, in my downloads folder, which back in the era when I had a physical hard drive that I had to, manage on my laptop, I would go through and I would delete things that, didn't need to be there. And now often most people, if you're in a work environment and you're in 365, you just never delete anything, or most people don't. And that's just your kind of personal work data, let alone, on the industrial scale. So I'm wondering whether perhaps, Paul, if I come to you first on this, how you can kind of build that in at an individual level, particularly since, as you said at the top of the call, often this is about people transformation, not just tech transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about bringing it to life for individuals and making it, I guess, real in their world. So I think giving examples of how much a gigabyte might kind of cost in terms of emissions in their world, so allow people to kind of see it through that lens. I totally agree with you on the attachments. Pet hate of mine. When somebody sends an email to the whole company and it's got an attachment on it, you think, oh my god, I've got 200 copies of that. There are, I guess, there are simple little things like that, but then that's not necessarily specific in terms of changing those behaviors to sustainability. That's very much a kind of change management. There's ways in which you can kind of, the psychology of communicating to people about where would we like people to go? How do we manage that change? Communicate the process of why it's good for them, why it's good for the organization. And I think one of my favorite quotes is, the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's occurred. It's not just say it once. It's continually repeating the message, because this sort of thing is never one and done, because people are always coming in and leaving. So it's about organizations hopefully providing some simple tips and advice to people and kind of continuing to kind of repeat that message. And it's not just sustainability and reduction of costs, particularly for people using OneDrive and emails. The less information you have, the easier it is to find what you need.
Yes.
So it's going to make their lives better.
I think that's a great point around communication. There's an old adage that people like to say in political communications that the voters won't remember something until you told it to them at least 7 times, which is why politicians go on the television and they just repeat the same thing over and over and over again. John, Grant, Klairi, do any of you want to come in on this question around kind of operationalizing this at the individual level?
So I would put this in the lens of software engineers and probably the more technical people within the organization, who ultimately can reduce emissions from the cloud by right sizing and even moving region or anything that can reduce the emissions from an enterprise's cloud computing setup. It needs to be high quality data they trust, that's justified scientifically. Otherwise they ignore it, basically. Getting that data and where they work as well, because they're very busy. So rather than having another dashboard, even though the cloud provider dashboard, they don't work there. Where they do work is within BI tools, within company their own central company dashboards, within FinOps tools. If the emissions data is there where they're already working, then that's when real action happens, where it's data they trust where they work, because everyone has a short attention span these days, or very little time. So accurate data where they're already working I think actually leads to CO2 reduction from our experience.
I think there's also a kind of a behavioral element here around building a little bit on what Paul was saying with regards to making it visible. I think there's, lots of companies are doing things like sending out statements, PwC included, what's your travel carbon footprint this month, for example. Everybody uses company book travel. What does that equate to? But also, if we think about it from a developer's perspective, if we're trying to build applications that are leaner, more efficient, effectively better code, a lot is we talk a lot about gamification in general, right? Everybody nowadays, you get bombarded with so much information. It's all overload, short attention spans. You gamify it, you make it exciting. I mean, there's already examples, I think, in the developer community where there's sites that effectively run competitions around who can create, fastest, leanest, meanest code in a positive way. Thinking about opportunities within an organization, and granted, it's not always as easy as, we're all going to build the same application and we're going to test it, and then who, builds the fastest one wins. But there are ways of thinking about how to excite individuals in the areas that matter to them, and build that personal, not just the purpose to do it, but actually the excitement to get involved and do it.
You almost need a personal sustainability score that follows you around from company to company. And, we have tools which show how much data you're using, but we also provide that as part of a shame back mechanism. So not just how much have you wasted by storing all this data from a cost perspective, but that's equally flippable to how much have you wasted from a CO2 perspective. And if you don't have that personal kind of connection to it, I don't think you'll ever change people's way that they use products. And maybe then you have to rely on the developers to make sure they are doing things more efficiently, storing less data, taking more, care in what they actually do as well.
Paul, can I bring you in here on this question around kind of the role of green software, application modernization, and how you can kind of incentivize the technical teams to make sure that the applications are actually running in the most efficient way possible?
Yeah, I don't think there's too much more to add over what everyone else has already said. I think gamification, bringing it to life for engineers, I mean, a lot of it just comes back to the data. Making the data visible to people so that they can take some action on it. So it's not just hidden away on a dashboard somewhere else that some ops team they do the sustainability stuff and everybody else just kind of gets on with the day job. If organizations want to bring about real change, then they've got to do it across the board. This is not just something that one team or one person can do. It needs to be championed more. I think that's
maybe government could champion it into universities, because coders start somewhere and software development starts somewhere, and it's not really at the moment, as far as I know, when I was at uni, and that was a long time ago, it's not built into the curriculum as being sustainable by design, because optimization has got worse over the years as we've created tools that will write the software for you and you pay less attention to it. Maybe we need to roll it back and try and build in that sustainability into how people think about code design, and therefore it becomes part of a best practice and a kind of a muscle memory rather than something else.
And I think although those practical modules may or may not exist, the truth is the next generation, like I say, the next generation, I'm in my 30s, I might not look it. The next generation of university students, they take sustainability hugely seriously. We've been lucky enough to have interns from the University of Cambridge at different times, and they used to all go to McKinsey or whatever big consulting firm that had a big paycheck on the other end of it and had all the reputation. But we were the small sustainability startups like us at the time were actually getting the most attention. So I think sustainability just is going to be completely embedded with this next generation of people coming out of these universities, and already is doing so. They just need the tools to be able to make it happen.
To bring it back to one of the points that Paul was saying earlier around the bringing it together on an organizational level, I think there's another point which is kind of a bigger picture point. But if we think about where IT sits in an organization, and frequently the reputation also that IT can have in large organizations, which is, they drag their feet and they can be slow and they're not partnering the business in the right way and all that kind of standard stuff. When you think about where IT sits in its reputation and where Chief Sustainability Officer, for example, sits with their Chief Sustainability Officer team, they are this far apart frequently is what we see. So, for example, when we talk about ESG technology, we talk about sustainability enabled by cloud. It's also not as strong a story as it could be, because the overall sustainability narrative for an organization, the behaviors that the organization is trying to motivate, the reputation that the organization is developing, sits in one part of the organization, and the IT sits in another, and they don't necessarily talk to each other in a way that they could. And I think bringing more cohesiveness around the sustainability town square, I think would be brilliant, because that would make a real difference.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And that's why in a lot of these events, we've been trying to encourage people to think about the intersection between FinOps and finance and the considerations of the CFO and the sustainability initiatives angle. There's a question in the chat, which I think Paul's already spoken a little bit to, but it resonates really well with your ExxonMobil versus BP point from earlier, Klairi, about how enterprise companies can balance the pursuit of profit with ethical concerns related to environmental sustainability, which also touches on this theme that we've been running around, whether you're viewing this as an ethical issue or whether you're viewing it as a financial issue. I'm just wondering if anyone wants to expand on this question around kind of how you can, perhaps at a senior level, get that kind of buy-in and make that balance.
Yeah, I think C-level people have to have both, as they have to generate profit for the company. I mean, that's what they're in business to do. But equally, if they have sustainability targets which they have to achieve, then they'll always have, whenever they're thinking of something that generates profit, they'll be thinking of how they can make that profit more sustainably. You just have to, I think, bring the two together like that, because they're not opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're really ones which, if you think about together, you can achieve the results. I think the danger is when you don't have a sustainability target at all. I've talked to some organizations and I've said, is sustainability on your list of kind of actions and items at the C-level? And they said no. Yeah, and it's profit basically that's driving them. But I think investors will start to look on those companies differently going forwards in the future. I think people who won't want to work for those companies because of their lack of sustainability policies. So you really have to have an internal strategy and a good ESG kind of approach, and have that in at every layer of the organization, not just the C-level, but at every kind of decision-making layer that sits below that, all the way down to the individual. I don't think you can separate them. Otherwise, I think it's really hard to do.
Sorry, there's a noise coming over the microphone that I'm just trying to eliminate. I'm conscious of time. We've only got about 5 minutes left, so I'd like to ask a kind of a closing question for the panel. Perhaps, John, I'll very unfairly come to you first on this one, but perhaps because I think you'll have an answer ready. If you could kind of wave a magic wand and get one kind of change implemented, whether that is in the cloud providers or in government at a regulatory level or within the kind of C-suite of the users of cloud services, to bring down the emissions of cloud and make everyone have that kind of lean green cloud that we've been talking about, what would it be? If you could change one thing, what would it be?
I kind of want to do some newsy controversial answer-ish, but like the SBTI if it goes in the way of allowing offsetting to basically contribute to enterprises scope 3 reductions, that would decimate cloud sustainability reductions, because people take the path of least resistance. And if you can just put money into giving the responsibility for sustainability action into a third party, everyone will do that and they won't look at their own emissions. And cloud sustainability is a massive, I would say has to be up there with the most addressable scope 3 emissions, considering software engineers behind their laptop can type some keys and reduce tons of CO2. It's such a rare opportunity that would just be completely whitewashed if that was to be the prevailing philosophy that people, us as a civilization, go with in the climate crisis. So I would say that's like probably at the very top, regulatory level, and kind of looking at the sustainability frameworks that people look up to. I think as long as we win there, I think the rest will sort themselves out. So that's probably my answer.
Thanks. Paul, if you could make one change wherever it was, what would it be?
John's already picked mine. I think if you're going to have the biggest impact that you can have, I personally, I think it's regulatory. Compelling people to report, compelling organisations rather, to report consistently and openly about their emissions. Because at the moment there still isn't consistency. I think the the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive coming from the EU, I think that's going to go a step in the right direction, but it's still only for larger organizations. So I think if you can do that and get people to report transparently, that just naturally puts pressure on everybody else, because people need the information in order to report on it, and then you can actually see are they being reduced. Whereas at the moment it's still too opaque. People aren't thinking about Scope 3 at all. They're just thinking about their own emissions. Because I generally think there's a groundswell of people from younger generation, but generally I think people want to do the right thing given the opportunity to do it. So it's kind of top down, and then that will kind of put pressure on business to do something about it.
So that's 2 votes for regulatory intervention around disclosure and Scope 3. Grant, are you going to break the trend, or?
Yeah, I'm going to only slightly. I think as we do in food packaging, we should be assigning a calorific CO2 value to everything that we touch within an organization, and I think that should be exposed to the people that are consuming those services or making decisions. And I think it is a little bit about what we've talked about, SBTI and other kind of areas are looking at making sure people do that and report on it. But I think it needs to come much more from every action we take decision. Do I deploy this instance here, there, this data center, that? You don't really know what the difference is. Whereas that information, if it was put up front to you in terms of a CO2 level of kind of green, red or amber, whatever it is, that will change people's perceptions. So it's not just the regulation, it's actually making individuals think about the decisions which they do as well. So
I really like that idea, but I dread to think of the idea of having that traffic light system that you have on food packaging next to my browser telling me how many tabs I have open on a personal level. That
the ChatGPT search as well. That would scare you probably quite a lot.
Yeah. And final closing words to you, Klairi, since we're out of time.
Mine actually builds on John's and Paul's regulatory point, or not even regulatory point, but as data gets better, as we are required to report more accurately, all of us, and that picture becomes clearer and also more trusted, the investor focus and confidence in starting to make investment decisions based on that information, as opposed to what is out there currently in the market, which could be reasonably shaky. I mean, everybody's estimating, right, and not reporting the full picture based on whatever the regulations require, depending on size, location, etc. I think having that investor confidence to actually start investing in sustainable businesses over non-sustainable ones, because that is the smart thing to do. And it is, to John's point around generations, in university now or going into university soon, it will be what everybody is going to be after. Having that data and reporting in place that enables that confidence to do it will be the difference maker.
Thank you, everyone. It's some really great points there. We've already got a vote in chat for a part 2, so perhaps we'll follow up about that. Well, a huge thanks to the panel. Thanks to everyone who joined us live, and if you're watching this as a webinar, thanks for clicking on the link. We'll be doing lots more sustainability and cloud-related content throughout the year, so please keep an eye on the techUK website and on our social media. And if you want to get involved in any of that work, please just drop me an email and get in touch. Huge thanks to everyone again, and that's it for now. Cheers, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks all.